This region is extremely unique in its geography, and because of that geography, it creates sustainable competitive advantages in business, and that applies to entrepreneurship in certain respects. Next up, we're going to hear from Keith Patridge, the president of the McAllen Economic Development Corporation, and Frank King from the Amex Shelters. And they're going to explain to you a new idea for how entrepreneurs can take advantage of the sustainable competitive advantages we have in this region. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Keith, who can flesh it out in a little bit better detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. It's a pleasure to be here today. Many of you know me. I've been with McAllen Economic Development for over 22 years. And we really have been focused on developing this area, first to create jobs, get the unemployment down. Now we're focusing on improving the quality of those jobs to improve and enhance the quality of life of our workforce and our community. And over that 22 years, we've had occasion to work with a lot of companies. Matter of fact, we've helped over 516 companies locate in McAllen and the McAllen and Reynosa region. They've created over 134,000 jobs, and they've absorbed 49 million square feet of manufacturing space. In that time, we typically see between 25, 30 companies a month that are looking at our area as a place to locate or expand to. And in the process of doing that, we really started identifying trends of where companies were going and global companies were going. And as I learned more and I saw more of these trends developing, I ran across this book called Fast Innovation that Kimberly co-authored. And I started reading that book and I said, wow, this is exactly what we're seeing happen. And so we've really focused on developing a niche for our area. And working with my counterparts in the economic development community from really Laredo all the way to Brownsville, thanks to Wanda Garza and the NAMRI group, we have brought the educational institutions together in a consortia, and we are all focused on advanced manufacturing, bringing this area into making it one of the world's top areas for advanced manufacturing. And the reason that we focused on that is because of the unique advantages that this area possesses. When you think about it, and I would ask you just to sit back and think for a few minutes about what we have that makes us so unique around the world. And not the least of which is the fact that where else in the world do you have a situation where the north side of town is the largest market in the world and the south side of town has labor rates of about $2.40 an hour fully fringed? You can see the uniqueness of that. And that when you start with that premise and you start looking at, well, what can we do with that? Kimberly spoke this morning about strategic competitive advantage. Kyle mentioned sustainable competitive advantage. And so really what we were looking at is how do we use that to innovate not new products, but new ways of doing things, new ways of manufacturing products, new ways of helping companies develop new products, new ways of manufacturing those products, distributing those products. And so as a result, we've really looked at some of the things that we've been using for a number of years to figure out new uses for those systems or those programs that we've been using to figure out how we can use those to create innovative and strategic advantage for our area. And one of them involves the whole concept of a shelter. And shelter has been around for a long time. It's actually been around almost as long as the Maquiladora program, since 1965. So it was originally created to help companies that were afraid of doing business in Mexico. It was really designed to help those people take advantage of what we had to offer here without actually having a presence in Mexico. And what I'm going to do here today is, because we have an expert with us, Frank King, and his is the Vice President of Amex Products. Amex is one of our largest shelter operations in the McAllen-Reynosa area. They are unique in that they are really a full-service shelter operation, and they also offer shelter services on both sides of the border, which makes them pretty unique in what they do. But as we started looking at this whole concept of innovation and commercialization and where we were at in the market, there were really two distinct advantages that all of a sudden started presenting themselves. As we were talking, Kimberly, I was fortunate enough to be able to take Kimberly across to show her what's happening on the Mexico side yesterday. And in that discussion, we kept talking, and I kept mentioning about doors opening and doors closing. With the economy where we're at right now, we're seeing a lot of doors opening for some and closing for some. We're seeing a lot of distressed companies out there. And one of the things that we found that a shelter operation is very good for is those companies that are distressed because sales are declining, cost may be increasing, or for some reason or another the companies are no longer viable where they're at. Working with investors to buy those companies, and instead of looking for ways to improve operations where they're located at now, we are now using the shelter, and Amex is doing this with clients, where they are actually, investors are buying these companies and picking them up from where they are and transferring them into a shelter operation. And what you're doing is you start looking at that, and again, Frank will get into a lot of how a shelter works, and you will see the benefits of that. But it basically had made these companies cost variable. And it eliminated their need for capital investment, and the companies that are using that are just unbelievable what kind of returns they're using. They're getting out of those type of arrangements. Again, using an old program that was originally designed to help companies utilize Mexico without being in Mexico, has now been transformed into a program to help companies acquire companies around the world, move them here, and increase profitability and increase the viability of those companies. Then we started looking beyond that program, and we started looking at commercialization. And as I've talked to people in the venture capital industry, angel investor market, what we have seen is there's a number of things that they look at. Of course, they're the investors in new ventures, and their interest is in getting a return as quickly as they possibly can. And one of the things that the shelter offers, and Frank will get into it, so you'll be able to see very obviously why the numbers work. In a shelter operation, it really allows someone to take a product or a product that they're ready to commercialize, and it allows them to put it into Mexico with very little capital investment requirements, and literally, because of the cost differential of a shelter or an operation in Mexico, the investor is able to literally start realizing a return on their investment almost from the very beginning, or very close to the very beginning of operations and the actual manufacturing process. We've talked a lot this morning so far about the innovation portion and the funding portion and the structure portion. Now what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Frank so that he can talk a little bit about an option that you have available for the actual manufacturing of those products that that will ultimately be sold and hopefully make all of you a lot of money. So with that, Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Keith. As Keith mentioned, I am Frank King from Amex Products, and I am here today to speak to you all about shelter manufacturing. It is a form of contract manufacturing, with the principal difference being that we don't procure your raw material or provide the equipment for your manufacturing process. So that's really the only thing that differentiates us from a turnkey or a piece part contract manufacturer. Typically, if you go to a contract manufacturer in the Pacific Rim or anywhere in the world and tell them you want your widget produced for X dollars per part, they will go and assure that the equipment's in place, they will procure the raw material, and then build your parts. We, on the other hand, don't take care of those two components of the process, but we do provide the indirect and direct labor, the facility, handle all the regulatory compliance and tax obligations within Mexico. And as Keith referred to, that keeps our customers isolated from being an actual entity in Mexico. They operate underneath our legal entity in Mexico as sort of a partner with us. Actually, their goods are on consignment to us as we are manufacturing their widgets in Mexico. Once those goods come back to the United States as finished product, they go back to the customer as the U.S. importer of record. So with that as a brief introduction, I'd like to go into our PowerPoint presentation and kind of explain how we operate and how we help our customers manufacture their widgets. Trying to figure out this new technology here. We are, as Keith mentioned, a fully integrated nearshore service provider with operations both in McAllen and Reynosa. We have a 230,000 square foot distribution facility in McAllen where we receive our customers' raw material. As I mentioned, it's then consigned to us as we take it into Mexico, transform it into a widget. It then comes back to our warehouse and is distributed out of that warehouse directly to your customers or to our clients' customers or to their distribution centers. This is just a simple flow chart basically identifying what I just described. You'll see the warehouse on the U.S. side, customs on both respective sides of the border. We completely handle all that interaction. We have our own in-house licensed customs brokers. We have our own MRP systems that we either utilize, primarily we utilize our customers' MRP systems because there's no real purpose in reinventing the wheel. So we have everything from SAP to JD Edwards set up in all of our different operations. Products then go into Mexico, transformed into finished goods, come back to the States. Our business functions like the name. We shelter you under our legal entity in Mexico, thereby shielding you from some of those inherent liabilities and all the gray areas that Mexico likes to reinterpret on a daily basis. It was designed initially in the 60s for companies to kind of test the water without going all in, so to speak, in Mexico and renting a facility on a long-term lease, setting up all their infrastructure. Electricity in Mexico is not like in the States. When you go to get power into your facility, you have to buy the rights from the Mexican government just to pay them for the consumption of electricity. And that'll, for 1,000 kVA, it's going to cost you $125,000 just to be able to pay 11 cents a kilowatt hour to consume that energy. So a lot of those capital requirements are very restrictive on new startups and entrepreneurs trying to launch a new product in Mexico. Therefore, it limits the capital investment required between me, my father who owns the company, our VP of operations in Mexico, and our internal legal counsel. We've got over 100 years of manufacturing experience in Mexico, so we quickly bridge the cultural gap and eliminate virtually the learning curve. And the involvement of the customer really depends on them. We've got a Japanese client that makes parts as a Tier 1, Tier 2 supplier for Toyota and Denso, and they're very involved in the operation. They've got engineering support here, material procurement, logistics. They handle that directly with our staff supporting them on a day-to-day basis. And then we've got other projects where there's absolutely no involvement from the customer. They're sitting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We get a production schedule. 500 people produce a widget, and it goes back to their distribution center. So the level of involvement really is dependent on the client's desires. As mentioned, the customer provides us with a production schedule. We adhere to their quality systems, whether it's QS, TS, ISO. We implement the same systems they have in place at corporate and the same productivity standards. In fact, we typically beat the U.S.-based productivity standards. Typically, we have a 3-year agreement for our shelter services, for our contract manufacturing services. we apply a cost per direct labor hour. And I'll show a sample cost model after the presentation so everyone can understand how we roll up those different costs of direct labor, indirect labor, facility assumptions, electricity, etc. And then we invoice for a direct labor per direct labor hour to produce your widgets using your productivity standard. The customer provides us, as mentioned, the raw materials, tooling and fixtures, other equipment necessary, the technical training. We manufacture everything from automotive parts to gold-plated jewelry. So we're not really experts per se in any one particular sector. So we like to take robust, mature processes, preferably, and implement those so that there are no snags. But we do, and especially of late, we've done a lot more startups and R&D and launches in Mexico, and a lot more smaller projects. Most of the mass manufacturing, robust, stable processes are already in Mexico or the Pacific Rim. So there's really not a lot of high labor content work remaining in the States. On the volume commitment, again, we're doing a lot smaller projects now, but in Mexico the only thing cheaper is labor. Real estate's the same price or more expensive. As I mentioned, electricity is a lot more expensive. There's no infrastructure. For example, in our park, we have 2 water wells, so we have water for our processes, and then we treat our own water within the park. So obviously that's more expensive than having a public water source. So all those different factors kind of offset the cheaper cost of labor. So if you're just wanting to put 1 or 2 people to work, it may make more sense to do that in McAllen, where labor costs are relatively low compared to the rest of the United States, so that you don't have the incremental costs of crossing the border and paying those tolls and import-export fees, paying the incremental costs for electricity, other manufacturing-related infrastructure. But once you get to that critical mass of 5, 10, 15, 20 people, then you get enough labor savings to start offsetting some of those costs that are out of our control. The shelter operator, Amex in this case, would provide all the direct and indirect labor, and I'll show how that factors in our spreadsheet after the presentation. We've currently got about 750,000 square feet of manufacturing space in Reynosa, and that supports currently 8 customers under the shelter program and 1 customer under management services, which is kind of like a consulting arrangement that we offer as well. We handle all the regulatory compliance, Hacienda, which is the Mexican IRS, environmental, which, believe it or not, is actually very strict in Mexico. Any government or union regulations or compliance is completely and 100% our responsibility. That will be completely out of your world. You will never hear of a union dispute or an issue with the environmental regulatory agency. Under management services, we offer a consulting arrangement where the customer does have their own legal entity in Mexico. A lot of times we'll get approached by very large organizations, Fortune 500 organizations, that want to have their own legal entity in Mexico. They want to have 1,000 direct labor. They don't necessarily want someone else in the mix, but they don't know how to do business in Mexico. So they'll come to us and sign a 2-year agreement so that we'll take them from cradle to grave, whether that's site selection, occupying an existing facility, retrofitting an existing facility, all the way through getting all the respective departments in place, HR, import-export, accounting, etc., and robust. And then after the end of the 2 years, actually after 18 months, we'll pass the baton to departmental heads of their choice. A lot of times they hire our people that are heading up those departments at that time, but we'll use that last 6 months to kind of police whoever they identify to head up those respective departments. And after the 24th month, we walk out the back door. Under that arrangement, you tap into all the different BPOs or business process outsourcing areas that we use to support both shelter and management services. And I've listed a few of those for y'all's reference. As mentioned, HR, the union and labor relations, payroll, financial reporting, facilities management. If there's a leak in the roof, you don't have to call a roofer. Import-export, logistics on both sides of the border. All the permits, licensing. In Mexico, if you've got over 50 direct labor, you have to have a nurse on site. If you've got over 1,000 direct labor, you have to have a doctor on site. So we have a doctor in Plant 1, and we have a nurse in all the facilities during every shift that report into that doctor. Purchasing, supplier development. We've got a customer that makes concrete reinforcement product for the road and bridge industry, or bridge sectors. And we actually went to Monterey and vetted out 3 suppliers for them to start receiving all the metal out of Monterey. So we're very involved with all the suppliers here locally as well as in Monterey and Mexico City. Industrial safety compliance, we've implemented 5S and different safety-focused quality initiatives in all of our operations. We do lean training, independent of our customers within our own administrative departments as well as on the manufacturing floor. Environmental compliance, cafeteria services, again, in Mexico, you're required to feed them a meal a day. So each of our plants have a cafeteria in them where we feed all the staff, and that is loaded into the number that Keith mentioned of $2.45 an hour. All these benefits are factored in that. Security, we have a main guards gate at the front of the park. We have a main guard gate going into our campus, and then we have guards posted in each of the respective buildings. Worker transportation, as you all know, most of them rely on public transportation. They're called pesetas, they're like little nursing home buses. So we provide those for transportation. And then we also handle all of the FM3s or the documentation you need as an expat to work in Mexico, as well as the documentation needed should you want your management that are Mexican nationals to go up north and train for your processes or receive some sort of orientation at corporate. On the U.S. side, as I mentioned, there's a warehouse and distribution center, and we also have about a 30,000 square foot manufacturing operation in McAllen as well. In that particular situation, we are taking advantage of the cost benefits on both sides of the border. Real estate, as I mentioned, is a little less expensive in McAllen. So what we did was with one of our customers, they make office organization products like expanding files, hanging folder, and that type of thing. And when we looked at the cutting presses, which these are presses that 2 presses would fill up this room, the footprint of those presses took up so much space and they only required 2 direct labor to operate the machine. The labor content didn't offset the savings in the facility and the electricity required to run those machines. So we made a case to put those 50 people in McAllen running those presses, and then once they've cut the paper to be assembled into a file folder or an expanding file, that cut paper would then go to Reynosa, where we have 550 people sitting in less space, that glues them all together and then packages them for final distribution. They then come back to McAllen. About 20% of that we send directly to the corporate expresses and the Staples of the world. The other 80% we send to their different distribution centers located throughout the United States. When we sit down with our potential clients, we like to go through, obviously, not just the supplier development, but look at their cost models and kind of sanity check both sides of the border, and oftentimes it leads to like a twin plant operation like I just described, where you're synergizing the benefits on both sides of the border, whether it's doing your pick and pack processes here versus shipping versus prepping your outbound finished goods in Reynosa, or going to the extent of stamping out and running your presses in McAllen and sharing those synergies with Reynosa. We look at the distribution base. Many of our customers, when they locate here, they'll shift from a Midwest region to maybe Dallas or Houston or somewhere else. They'll kind of realign their distribution channels so that they're better fit to Reynosa and McAllen. We'll look at all the materials and decide where it is viable for us to go to Monterey or local suppliers and look at different plastic molders and what have you to try to save them some money in that regard. We look at all the HR requirements. Needless to say, we need to integrate those with what Mexico requires from a training standpoint. In Mexico, we have to give them personal hygiene training and some basic training on manufacturing. So all that has to be logged and kind of parallel with what you do at corporate, so that we can demonstrate to the regulatory agencies in Mexico that we've complied with federal labor law in Mexico. We look at your training programs and see if there's anything where the literacy level in Mexico is not as high as it is in the United States, needless to say. So a lot of times we'll take the training and work instructions from our customers and add a lot of visual aids or summarize the statements or the instructions so that they're much easier to understand and easier for them to follow. For example, in the paper product project, the process they're gluing paper together with aluminum molds. It's a very simple process. So there are no job instructions. We've got about 10 pictures in front of each job station, and the things they're supposed to do not have a big red X through them, and the things that they aren't supposed to do have a big red X through them. So it's a very visual orientated job instruction. We'll also look at any environmental or legal concerns that may exist in Mexico that don't exist here. One example I always like to give is that Mexico considers rubbing alcohol a hazardous material. So your rubbing alcohol has to be labeled as hazmat, has to be in a yellow container, excuse me. and has to be recorded in your, and the MSDS sheets have to be filed for your isopropyl alcohol. In the United States, needless to say, you can have your rubbing alcohol sitting out without a diamond. Once we've arrived at a contract, we'll sit down with the customer and start doing weekly startup meetings that are Gantt chart based. So everything from the establishment, we as Amex, as our legal entity in Mexico, when we start producing your widget, we have to go modify our manufacturing permit license to allow us to perform your processes. So at the beginning of that sheet is us getting our permits to manufacture your widget, facility infrastructure, when are the lines going to be moved, what do we need to do to prepare for those lines arriving, do we have enough air, do we have enough PSI to operate your machines, etc. So we would sit down and create a Gantt chart with our VP of Operations in Mexico, and every week get together and make sure we stay on track. It typically takes us 75 to 120 days to start up a new project. Whereas if you go greenfield and standalone without Amex or some other sort of shelter provider or consultation, your best case scenario is going to be 6 months. So we really shave off at least 3 to 4 months off of that ramp-up schedule, therefore saving you that money as well, and that goes back to the limited capital required. The customs process is very tedious. They want every nut, bolt, and screw documented on every single good that's going across the border, and I'm not exaggerating. You have to have certificates of origin. Up until about 18 months ago, we were allowed to put available upon request next to certain certificates of origin. SOT came back, the Mexican regulatory agency came back and informed us that that was no longer allowed, and for the last 5 years, everything that we had submitted that said available on request now had to have a original certificate of origin. So we had a staff of 12 people that spent a year and a half chasing down all those different suppliers and finding those certificates of origin. So do not underestimate Mexican customs. Transportation is self-explanatory. It costs about $550 for a round trip in and out of Mexico. Southbound raw material, northbound finished goods, going to cost you about $550 for a 53-foot trailer, maybe $450 for a bobtail truck. We coordinate all that, invoice you at cost. All the rigging and obviously machine infrastructure is handled on our end as well. The benefits under either of our programs, the consulting or shelter, is the faster startup, access to the low-cost labor in Mexico, less liability as you are shielded from those constantly changing customs, tax, regulatory issues. Manufacturing and logistics support is real time. You don't have to worry about the Asian time difference or whatnot. And we think the McAllen standard of living is a real bonus, not to mention the schools and the hospital infrastructure that we have here. When you compare us to Laredo, no offense if anybody here from Laredo, or El Paso or some of the other border towns, even Brownsville. I would much rather live in McAllen than Brownsville. This is just marketing gobbledygook. So if anybody wants a copy of it, it's just kind of a list of some of the perks of doing business in Mexico. Reduce your labor costs. There's no workman's comp in Mexico. I don't know what y'all's U.S. workman's comp costs, but I know what mine does, and that's a big benefit for us. The card check initiatives and other things that we're concerned about as small businessmen don't exist in Mexico. A lot of our customers will decide to cherry pick, so to speak, labor-intensive operations and move those to Mexico and then backfill that space and backfill some of those functions with new product design or with new sectors that they want to penetrate, using the savings of those high labor content projects, now producing the product in Mexico cheaper to fund the additional research and development or product startup initiatives back at corporate. It helps you improve and maintain profit margin along those same lines. It allows you to flex your production schedules. Due to the fact that we've got 8 different projects, we're able to kind of shift some of our direct labor in between projects. So we intentionally try to acquire business that offsets cycles that exist within our model. Our automotive sectors are on this. Our automotive customers, are on a particular cycle. Our office product customers are on a particular cycle. So we kind of try to mix and match those as best we can. It's never perfect, especially when the economy we're in now, when everybody's going the same direction, down, down, down. But up until a couple of years ago, it had worked out very well for us. It's a lot less headaches being able to jump on a plane and come to McAllen or Reynosa versus going to Asia. We do have an extensive IT department, and our PBX in McAllen is linked by microwave and T1s to our campus in Reynosa. So all of our phone calls are US based, 3-digit extensions to any of the 400 phones that we have within our organization. And then you tie as a customer into that same backbone. So if you need a video conference or you need to email or whatnot, you would be going through that same network. If any of you have done manufacturing in Mexico, you know that Telmex is not exactly a pleasure to do business with, and we decided a long time ago to eliminate them and basically become our own miniature phone company. We're fully integrated, as Keith mentioned. I like to tell people that once your raw material is south of San Antonio, you don't need to worry about it. We'll let you know when it's ready to go back to San Antonio. So we're fully integrated, and as I mentioned, fully up to speed on all lean manufacturing training and licensing. And last but not least, do it before the competition does. Some basic contact information and my appreciation for listening to my rant. I'd like now to kind of walk through the cost model so that everybody can understand how we arrive at our cost per direct labor hour to produce your widgets. In this particular model, I start at 20 direct labor. Now, I apologize again, I'm immobilized here. But in this head count range, the baseline of direct labor is 20 people that you can see there at the rate calculation point at the top. And the reason that we do that, I mentioned critical mass earlier. If I move that number to 10, in fact, let's do it real quick for the sake of demonstration. At 20 direct labor, the cost would have probably been around $10 or $11 an hour. At 10 direct labor, it goes from $10.10 to $14.82. That's a pure result of the cost of the real estate, the cost of electricity, the overhead, and that 10,000 square feet that's allocated in that project. So we use 20 generally because we like to see that head count as a beginning stage, because that's where you really start to reap the benefit of the leverage of against your overhead. So at 20 people, your direct labor cost is about $9,000 a month. That's the number here, and as Keith mentioned, that's about $244 direct labor hour at a 12.5 to 1 peso. And we've made some basic assumptions here for indirect management. A project manager is typically a 4-year degreed engineer. That individual will be bilingual. He'll be perfectly capable of handling the SAP system or JD Edwards or whatever MRP system or ERP system that we have in place, and with reporting into corporate and reporting and dealing with customer service and those sorts of issues. We also, at 20 people, you don't need a lot of other indirect support, but we threw in a material handler and a group leader. Underneath that, you've got shared service positions. These are the people that handle those departments I was describing that are kind of in the background that you don't have to deal with. Whether it's a controller in accounting, an administration manager in HR, the IT techs and IT management, the import-export, the nurses and doctors that I mentioned, etc. What we do is we go in and find synergy there with our different customers. In some of our buildings, one of our buildings, we've got three customers. Actually, 2 divisions of 1 customer and 2 other customers. So there's 4 projects in that building. So we allocate 0.1 of a controller, because our controller handles our whole entire business. So we're able to go through those different shared service support positions and allocate to the different customers a percentage of each of those areas, whether it's security guards or janitors or payroll. So instead of having 1 person in all those departments, you've got a fraction. As your head count goes up, like here you're at 31 to 50 direct labor, 51 to 75 direct labor, 76 to 100 direct labor. As that goes up, you'll see that your allocations slightly increase as well. We also have a factor in there for our licensing of our computer software, the rentals of our copiers in each of the buildings and that type of thing, which is allocated in that line item. And that brings you to a monthly operating cost at 20 people. We break that down into the number of direct labor hours, remembering that Mexico is a 45-hour work week, not a 40-hour work week. And that breaks you into a cost per direct labor hour of work. We then add our service fee, which is our gross margin. So in that is people like me and all of our upper management that you don't see allocated in those shared service positions, as well as real estate that's not currently occupied and other overhead that we incur. And also, just as you saw with the incremental headcounts on costs absorbed, on overhead being absorbed, our fee lowers as the volume goes up as well. Tie those 2 numbers together, you get a cost per direct labor hour. and then we integrate the facility assumptions. In this particular example, we have the project in 10,000 square feet until they get to 75 direct labor. At 75 direct labor, they jump to 25,000 square feet. So you'll see in here, and that's approximately a 40 cent or 39.5 cent a month rent on a multi-tenant building, which is market right now at that square footage level. Utilities are a little light. I mentioned earlier the 11 cent an hour per kilowatt hour cost of electricity. That's bench assembly. So if you've got any type of injection molding, welding, anything that's going to consume a lot of juice, that number needs to be tweaked into the mid-30s, somewhere between 31 and 35 cents. That gets you to a total burden cost, facility burden cost, and this number includes everything but your raw material, your equipment, and your logistics. That gets you to a cost per direct labor hour, as you can see, of about $10 an hour at 20 people, at 31 at $8.88, 51 $8.31. And if your ideas and your products are successful enough, and we're all lucky enough to get to 200 people, your cost is now at $5.81 an hour, facility burden, everything but your cost of raw materials and your equipment. So, in a nutshell, that's what we offer, and that's what we currently do with about 1,000 direct labor there in Reynosa. If anybody has any questions or wants me to go into any of these particular costs or concepts in any more detail, please feel free to ask. Well, an easy way for me to do that is change the direct labor rate to the minimum wage plus a slight burden for FICA and everything else. What's minimum wage now? 7 1/4? Right? So let's say what, $8, $8.50? You really don't save a lot of money. You save a little money on indirect labor, but it's not material. You might save 10 or 15%. But let's, for the sake of discussion, you just went to $16.16. So you're tacking on $6, 60% to do it in the States. Even at 20 people, you go and look what that does to you at those higher head counts. That's what I'm saying. Look at the higher head counts. You're not absorbing it. You're losing that leverage. So you went from 5 and change at 200 people to almost $12. That's where it really gets you. Anybody else? Yeah, I do. I've got that right here. He wants his? Yes. He wants the logistics breakdown of this northbound and southbound border crossing. Sure. I don't know which removable disc I am, but I think I was G, wasn't I? I'm K? Nope. There we go. Sorry. Okay. Can you guys see that, or is it too small? Let me try to blow it up a little bit here. They have to go get the 07 version on me. I'm still the 03 guy. All right. Editing? Oh, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. This is for both a short truck, which is like a U-Haul, and a 53-foot trailer. So you'll see all the different line items. This is the English here. Trucking transport, bridge fee, ACE manifest, which is a new requirement for import-export service fee, whether you're using us or an external broker. The permits, taxes, processing fees, etc. So that's the import to the U.S. and then this one here is your export to Mexico. So as you can see, you've got $277 importing to the States, a little more expensive, and then you've got $228 for a 53-foot trailer going south. We do. We do that more northbound with finished goods than we do southbound with raw material. Most of our raw material goes across full truckload, but coming back with finished goods, we consolidate frequently. A lot of our customers, we do have 2 circuit board operations, so needless to say, for them, they ship a full skid that's been a good day. So we'll consolidate our circuit board projects as well as any other customers that ship LTO. So. And we try to do that in the county as much as possible also. But usually the distribution points in the U.S. are so different that it's hard to find a synergy. Well, yeah, it would be. We would just allocate it exactly as a percentage of, truck holds 24 skids. You put, there's 16. We combine 3 or 4 customers. There's 16 skids. However many of those 16 is your prorated amount. So. Okay. That was easy. Thank you. If anybody wants, I did burn a couple of copies. I'm not sure which spreadsheet I put in here, but there's a spreadsheet in here and some sample contracts and stuff like that. So if anybody wants something to put them to sleep, they're welcome to grab them. Thank you very much. Appreciate y'all's time.
Okay. So as you can see, I think they display pretty well some of the sustainable competitive advantages that Rio South Texas has for ramping up a technology-based startup and getting to market quickly.